I don't have any prizes. Sorry. Sorry. I have some movies that we can watch. Yeah. Hi everyone. My name is Paul Callaghan. I'm the director of the Free Play. You don't need to whip my name. That's okay. I'm the director of the Free Play Independent Games Festival, and what I thought I would talk to you about today is some of the things. If you're interested in making games, or if you're interested in getting into independent development, talk about some of the avenues available to you, and talk about some of the options, and talk about some of the games that you might end up making, as well as the technologies and ways of finding community. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is this idea of indie development, because it gets bandied around a lot, and it's for a very small like type of games, but there's a lot of different ways of thinking about what indie development actually means. The first one is thinking about independent development as a financial thing. So companies like Fireman or Halfbrick, who made Flight Control or Fruit Ninja, respectively, they are financially independent. They've made their own projects, or they've done work for hire, and then they've made their own IP that they've then sold on their own and become independent that way. You could also probably put Valve into that category as well, because they self-fund their own projects and they make the types of games that they want to make. There's also this idea of indie as a lifestyle choice, where people sort of commit to making their own games on their own terms by themselves. So some people might basically work, making web apps, or work in a shop, while in the evening they go home and they make games, and in the weekend they make games. And there are a lot of people more overseas than there are here who do that sort of thing. They don't necessarily want to have a career in making games, and they don't necessarily want to make heaps of money, but they're doing it because making games is something that they love to do, in the same way that maybe people write novels or make films or write music. And then the last part is this idea of indie as an aesthetic. And what that means is that's the idea that there's a pervasive indie style, or kind of an indie theme that connects to the types of games that people make. Obviously everyone knows what a AAA game looks like. There's lots of shooting generally. There's lots of running around. There's lots of third-person cover, or there's lots of first-person. It's games that have high production values. It's games that have hundreds of people in their team, and it's games that have millions of dollars on their marketing budget. Where a kind of an indie aesthetic. It's like one or two people. It's very personal. It's sort of a unique experience. It's potentially experimental. They probably don't have any money in their marketing budget at all, so they have to do it all through word of mouth, or through forums, or online on Twitter. And so there is this kind of sense of this excuse me. There is this sort of sense of this unified sense of what an indie game might be. And I'll talk about that a little bit as I show you examples of each of these things. But right now, it's never been easier to make games than at any other point in the history of video game development. You can go out and you can spend $100 and get an iOS developer license. You can download UDK. You can download something like Unity or Cocos 2D, which we'll look at in a second. It's never been easier to find an audience for your game. Like, people are craving these new experiences all the time. And it's never been easier to connect with a community, because there are heaps of people who are making games on their own, or in groups, or trying to build studios, or trying to build communities to make games that are interesting to them. But there are a bunch of ways that you can sort of think about it, and one of the nice things about being an independent developer is that you can choose the path that you want. You can choose the type of game that you want to make. You can choose the way that you make it. You can choose how to sell it, if you want to sell it at all. And you can choose who you want to associate with. There's no kind of indie mafia that's going to tell you what to do. There's no kind of one big indie studio that's going to tell you what to do. It's a chance to kind of develop your own personal style and your own personal path through game development. So there's a lot of different technologies out there that help you to make independent games. And the first one is UDK, which is the Unreal Development Kit, which is the engine that Epic used to make Gears of War and Unreal and Bulletstorm, I think. But UDK is a free version that you can download, and it's the exact same tools. And there are a bunch of indie games that are made in this, and I've got just two that I wanted to show you. So this was made by a team in 9 months, and this is kind of a proof of concept of a mech shooter. It's a game called Hawken. I think it's called Hawken. So that was a small indie team over a period of 9 months. They made that kind of level as a proof of concept. The second game I want to show you is a game called Antechamber, which is developed by Alex Bruce, who's based in Melbourne. One person knows what that is. It's made in the same engine and it's first person, but it's completely insane. So it probably doesn't make much sense watching that trailer, but Alex has won like every award under the sun for that game. He's been covered in international press and local press about that game. He's been working. He's made it all by himself over the past 3 or 4 years, and it should hopefully be released sometime this year. So that's not even a team. That's just one guy who's decided to make that game, and he just went to university. Did a little bit of time in a local studio and then left and decided that was the game that he was going to make. And it is absolutely incredible. I've played it. The next platform I want to... So, like, those games are made with the Unreal Development Kit, which you can go on Epic's website and download, like, today or tomorrow and just start messing around with the same technology that Gears of War has, and making games and playing with animations, and trying to make something kind of cool that will then go off and win awards. Another engine which you can just go out and download is the Unity engine. which has had a whole bunch of games made in it as well. The first one I want to show you is a game called Ah. You guys can obviously know better than I do. So this is a sequel to their Casual Disregard for Gravity game, which is just about falling and trying to guide yourself as you fall through these levels.
Would you curl up into a ball and cry like a small girl?
Or would you defy the authorities and jump?
Again, made in an engine that you can go out and download when you get home, or you can do it here if you want. I don't know. But yeah, kind of cool. Like, and again, just like a really some of those other games, it's just a really simple idea that they've gone. What would the racing game look like if you were falling? And built a game around that. Another game written in Unity by local developers, 10 Man Games. These are closer to Choose Your Own Adventure books, if anyone knows that. So it's this kind of fantasy world, but it plays out like an electronic book, and every now and again you get to make decisions, or if you're in fights, it rolls dices, and it has this kind of combat system in it. But they're basically Choose Your Own Adventures. And those guys are based in Melbourne, and I think Stefan, who spoke the other day, I think he's done some work with them as well. If you're sort of more interested, if you're less interested in doing 3D stuff, there's an engine called Flixel, which was made by Adam Saltzman, and it's more geared towards like 2D stuff and getting things rapidly prototyped in Flash. Most of you should know this game, which was made in Flixel. So this is Cannibal. One of the great things about Cannibal is that they made the source for it open, so you can go online and actually download how they wrote the game and see how it all fit together, and like look at Flixel and learn from an actual game that was really successful as well. One of the other engines which recently got upgraded, it's one called Cocos 2D, and probably the most famous game that was made in that is Tiny Tower. If anyone's played it. A couple of you. It's out now. You don't have to wait for it. And the last one I wanted to show is XNA, which is the technology that Microsoft uses on the Xbox. So if you write games in XNA, they pretty much will run directly on your 360. And one of the most famous examples of that is Half-Brick when they did their indie or their Fridays. So they did all their games in XNA, and then released them on the Xbox Live Indie channel, which we sadly don't have yet. So all of those are free, like the engines and the technologies. So if you're interested in kind of getting started in making games or as an indie, you can just go out and download them. And all of them have a bunch of communities around them and a bunch of tutorials. So it's really easy to just start making things. And there's a whole bunch of art assets with a lot of them as well. So you don't have to like worry about whether or not you can draw a smiley face or whatever. You can just use someone else's art assets. The second part is distribution and how you actually connect with an audience and how you sell the games that you've made. One of the really great things about working in games is that we've pretty much solved a lot of the digital distribution issues. We can sell a game to anyone pretty much anywhere, like just over the internet. A lot of other creative industries are still trying to figure out how that might work. We obviously have the App Store, and this is Ski Safari, again, which is an Australian-made game. It's done by a company called Defiant Development in Brisbane, if anyone has played it. So the App Store is totally like a real godsend for indie developers because you can pay your $100 and put your game up there and set the price, and you don't have to go through middle people or publishers or anything like that. You can just distribute your own game and do your own marketing and kind of take a 70% cut. There's also Steam, who just announced their like 3 people who just announced their Project Greenlight system on that, where now people can put their independent games up there, and if the community vote on it, those games will end up on Steam. So as long as you can build a following, or as long as you can build a community for your game, it's now easier than ever to kind of find a way to get it distributed on Steam. And the last one, this is a local company called Desura, and they run IndieDB and ModDB, which is kind of like Steam for indies. And so if you've got an independent game, you can put it up there, and it's a distribution channel and a platform and a social and community network for independent game developers. I mean, they market themselves as the indie Steam, so it's a really good avenue. If you don't think you're quite ready for Steam, or if you'd much rather have a community that might be a bit more indie centric, it's a really good place to go. And on that kind of community thing, one of the nice things about indie development again is that there are a whole bunch of people who want to help you make games, and there are a whole bunch of people who are really generous about helping you to make games. If you go online, there are a whole bunch of websites like gamedev.net and deviantart.com and sumia.com, which are all about creating art or creating code, or hooking your teams up with other people. Like if you're a designer and you need a programmer, maybe going on Sumia and posting in their forums and saying, hey, I'm looking for this sort of person. Is anyone out there want to help me? You might be able to find someone to collaborate with. There are also a whole bunch of in-person groups. This is the IGDA, the International Game Developers Association. They have a Melbourne chapter who meet once a month in the city. And it's full of people who, like making games and want to talk about the process of making games, and who also want to play games. This is a thing they had in their exertion lab at RMIT. So they have all of these kind of really diverse and interesting meetups. There's also Free Play. This is a game that we played at the festival called Lemon Joust Club, which is 2 wooden spoons and a lemon, and you have to knock other people's lemon off. And we played it in a bar in the city. Free Play is basically a festival dedicated to the community and the kind of the cultural side of game development, not necessarily the business stuff. So we have sessions about the aesthetics of game development. Oh, that's going on behind me. I didn't quite realize that. So we have an expo that showcases locally developed games. We have conversations and panels. We have awards. That's Alex. We had a chiptunes music night and a band called Technodrome who did video game cover music, one of which was a Pokemon theme tune, which is amazing. And so we're basically trying to engage with an arts and a creative and a maker and a technical community, not necessarily people who want to build studios. We're far more interested in why people make things and make interesting things. We also run awards, and it's possible that we might, over the next 6 months, look at introducing a student-specific award for projects at that kind of lower than professional level. So I want to sort of finish up with a few pieces of final advice about being an independent game developer. And these are things that I've sort of learned, through being an indie developer and also through running the festival. The first thing is that games are not special in terms of how they are made. There's a whole bunch of other creative industries like music and like film and like the visual arts that kind of understand the creative process, as well, if not better, than making video games. There are a whole bunch of technology industries that understand how to run a business as well as, if not better, than video games. And really your best bet if you want to be an independent developer is to hook up with them, to connect with them, and to basically learn what they can teach you about. If you want to run a business, go and talk to these people. If you want to make art, then go and talk to these people who've made art for a long time. The other thing is that it's very unlikely that you will make millions of dollars. People sort of get into game development because they think it's a cash cow, or they've been told that it's kind of an exploding market and an exploding audience. That's true, but like film or like music or like writing a novel, the number of people who make millions of dollars out of their game is very, very small. You hear about those people who've made millions of dollars because they've got millions of dollars, and that's kind of an exciting thing. But you sort of need to get into it accepting the fact that you will probably make a living if you're lucky. And that's sort of I make a reasonably good wage, being an indie developer, but I also need to teach. I also need to do education stuff. I also need to, run the festival. I also need to write other things that aren't necessarily me just making games. So you might be a millionaire, and that risk might be worth it for you, but the chances are you won't be a millionaire with your first game. The other thing is that you have to work quite hard. both in terms of like learning how to make an interesting game, but also in the way that you learn how to distribute that game. If you want to run a studio, you need to like work hard to learn a bunch of business skills. You need to continually look at your work and try and improve it. So continuously sort of evaluate it, or maybe take it out and show it to other people and ask them what they think. And then go back and then make another game, make a new game, or iterate over the old game. It's really hard work, but it's no more hard work than making a film or writing a novel or making music. And the last piece of advice, and this is like the most important one probably, is try and make something interesting. Don't just try and duplicate what you've seen in other indie games. Don't just duplicate what you might have seen in a big AAA game. Like, try and come up with something that no one has ever done before. Because if you want to make millions of dollars, like, what people will pay for is something that people have never done before. And the types of things I'm talking about when I say make something interesting are these sorts of games. So Journey, I think, is really interesting. The one on the top right is a game called De-Rester, which you can get on Steam and for Mac and PC, which is a game where you walk around an island, but it's incredible. The bottom left there is a game called Sword and Sorcery on iPad, which is kind of a point-and-click adventure, but not really a point-and-click adventure. And it has the most incredible story, and it's very self-conscious about being a game. Top left is Bastion, which is a game that has a narrator. An incredibly interesting idea where rather than having a whole bunch of cutscenes, the game talks to you, and the game has a character and a personality about what it wants you to do. Top right there is World of Goo, incredibly interesting game. A game which grew out of like an 8-hour game jam. They built the first version of World of Goo really quickly. Bottom left there is a game called Tiny Wings, which is totally worthy of a whoop, which just released version 2.0, and it's a gorgeous game made by one guy. And it's a really interesting thing, but like the mechanics of it were reasonably well researched. A lot of people had done some prototyping. He just kind of covered it and made it really polished, and put it out into the world. Limbo, top left. Super interesting because not only its art style, but because it's a game that is about death, and it knows it's about death, and it taunts you about the fact that it's about death in really interesting ways. Top right there is a game called Frozen Synapse, which is like a turn-based combat strategy thing with like a Tron aesthetic. Really interesting. Bottom left there is a game called Machinarium. Hand-painted artwork, gorgeous, really kind of crafted animations for each of the characters, like beautifully responsive characters, and just a gorgeous world that you want to spend time in. Top left is a game called Unmanned, in which you play a US pilot who flies combat drones, and it's kind of a political response to things like that. Top right is a game called At a Distance, which you can only play on 2 computers that are networked to each other. And bottom left is a game called Dysphoria, which is a kind of an autobiographical game made by someone called Anna Anthropy, and you should all kind of look that up, because she wrote a book called Rise of the Video Game Zinesters, which is really interesting, and is about a lot of this kind of indie development that I'm talking about. And the last slide, interesting games. This is a game called GURP, which is a game about rock climbing and twisting your fingers. Top right there is a game called Johann Sebastian Joust, which is a music game that you play with move controllers, that you're only allowed to move as fast as a piece of music is playing, and you have to tag people. And bottom left there is a game called Proteus, which kind of looks like an Atari 2600 game, but is really interesting in how it encourages you to navigate the space and move through the space. So when I mean interesting, that's really what I mean. Things that people have never seen before, things that are interesting to you, things that are slightly weird, or things that use technology in interesting and innovative ways. And really, that's all I have to say. Thank you for your time.
No going back from now. Did you want to take some questions? We got like 5 minutes. If you
Yeah,
want.
there's time for questions. That'd be great.
Okay. We'll only get like through 2 or 3. I'll give it to Jesse because he always asks good ones, and then I'll get this dude at the front. You don't want anything? You're just jumping up and down? Fantastic. If you need the toilet, dance the toilet straight back. Hello, Mr. Jesse.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. Talking about indie games, I'm wondering if you could just give me some like examples of indie games that have transferred or become so big that they're not just indie games anymore. So, Minecraft is a good example. Any fans of it, and also stuff like Super Meat Boy and so on that have started off as an indie, but they've become so recognizable in the world. Fez is another one as well.
Yep.
So.
I mean, well, those are the sort of the big examples. Those are sort of examples of indie as aesthetic, I think. I mean, Minecraft is like the classic indie success story, where it was just sort of sitting there for such a long time, and then just momentum build, and then one day he sold like millions upon millions of units. I mean, the interesting thing about Minecraft is that everyone after he Notch released Minecraft was like, you need to do Minecraft on all these platforms, and he went, actually, I'm going to do this collectible card game, So I mean, Super Meat Boy is a good example. Braid is kind of the archetypal example as being the first big indie success story. I think D-Rester is sort of on that journey, which is the fastest and probably the biggest selling title on PSN as well. Definitely has an indie aesthetic, even though they were funded by Sony. So, like those big high-profile indie ones, like Meat Boy, Fez, Braid, are the ones that are sort of in that space, I think.
Anyone else? Two more? Just your hands up? Yeah, okay. All right, calm down. I'll get there. All right, calm down.
Super enthusiastic.
Yeah, it's good. This one always asks good questions too. No pressure.
Hi.
That's all I wanted to say.
And she lets me down. Fantastic.
That's not really a question.
It is. It's
Hi.
Hi. Well, she
Question
put a
mark?
question mark on the end. That's the same thing. Yep, the back corner. I'll be there in a sec. I should just drop.
I was trying to think of some other big indie success stories.
What about like what would you define Half Brick and things like that as one or?
Well, they're financially independent rather than, I think. Yeah, I mean they're definitely there, but like I said, there's sort of different definitions of what indie is.
It's more an independent game than an indie game in a true sense.
It's not necessarily indie as aesthetic, but it is indie as finance.
So you were saying about all the different things that you can use to make indie games. What's your favorite?
Oh, I really like Flixel, and I'm sort of hoping that at some point I'll get a chance to use Cocos 2D. But I know a lot of people swear by Unity. It depends what you want. Flixel's really great if you've got like a tile map based game to get going. Unity's really good if you've got like a 3D based game that you want to get going. And Cocos 2D I haven't really had a chance to play with, but so yeah, it depends what type of game you want. But I really like Flixel because I'm less interested in making 3D games at the moment.
Last one I think for
Last
now.
question.
What do you think the most important aspect of an indie game is?
I think having an interesting, I was going to say mechanic there, having an interesting aesthetic that might have the mechanics. Journey, as well as having the fact that you're playing with a stranger on the other side of the world, everything about the game reinforces that isolation and connection. So they've come up with that mechanical aspect of it, but then they've also, every time they've made a decision, they've gone, how does it reflect that, or how does it support that? So I think that like the aesthetics and the mechanics combined are the two most important things. And then how that feeds into your game design and your visual design and your sound design as well.
I think we'll go that for now. Everyone give Paul a round of applause. Thank you for coming out.
Thank you. Thank you.